Paul Harrell, weekdays from 4 to 6. Learn more at paulharrell.com.
Welcome to the program. Thanks so much for being with us. My name is Paul. You have found the intersection of conservative ideas and reality, where we are building a liberty machine. I want to welcome back to the program. We have State Representative Jim Dotson is with us. Jim, welcome to the program, sir.
Good evening.
You see, so Jim is a Republican, and he is from District 93. Would you go ahead and tell us District 93? What's the geography there?
The geography is pretty much all within the city limits of Bentonville.
Okay.
So northwest Arkansas, Benton County.
Okay. All right. So in Bentonville. I want to have you on because, you know, legislators have been coming on, and that we've been doing these things called the impression of the session. So feel free just to take as long or be as brief as you want. What was your impression of the session 2017?
Well, now that I've had a few months to kind of reflect on it, you know, you're in the heat of the session. During the time, you kind of focused on or trying to focus on all the spending plates that you've got going on, as well as the things that are primary concern to you. This session, my perspective was based on one bill primarily that I worked for several months, and throughout the entire session, save for just a few days.
Hang on one second. You broke up there a little bit. So we heard what you said about, you know, on one bill. Most of your session was spent on one bill. Sorry.
Right. So can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Yes.
Okay. So long and short of it, the primary focus of my entire session was focused on one bill or one concept. It turned into two bills, a House version and then at the end, the Senate version. But as I look back over the course of the session, I actually presented either in committee or on the floor 14 different pieces of legislation or bill numbers. That one bill was two of those. But out of that 14, 9 of them are now acts. So personally, even though it was a bitter failure and the one that I worked on the most, it didn't get all the way through. Mm-hmm. Very disappointing and frustrating. Looking back cumulatively over the entire session, I had a fairly decent session overall, and I think some good things were accomplished.
Yeah. Let's
net total.
Let's talk about the one bill that you're talking about, that went into two bills. It's school choice, which is
correct.
It's a pretty big part of the Republican Party platform, and I know you worked really hard on it. And I know there was a lot of negotiations, you know, trying to make this work, and yet...
I filed it early on.
Yeah, early on, because, I don't know, did you know it was going to be such a battle?
Well, I mean, I suspected that it was probably going to be a decent discussion back and forth, and I wanted to work with everybody as much as possible to get some sort of a consensus on some of the particulars. However, with 3/4 majorities, Republicans in the House and the Senate, I really was surprised that it was as big of that the teachers' unions and the superintendents that always oppose the Republicans and the Republican Party platform, by and large, in the education arena, had that much sway with the Republican majority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
I mean
that was kind of a little bit more of a surprising and frustrating end to the entire debate.
Yeah, absolutely, because just like you said, you had these massive Republican majorities. Here's something that, I mean, people have been talking about school choice for a long time. People have knocked doors for this is on being on the platform, and yet, you've got the typical people. Like, I'm looking at a headline back on January 26th, the Arkansas Times, which is a liberal rag. You expect them to do this. Headline: School Choice Bill Draws Criticism from Superintendents. And at the time, Governor Hutchinson was criticizing this. Now, according to reports, it was reported that he later got on board with that. Can you talk just a little bit? We're talking with State Representative Jim Dotson. What was everybody so afraid of? Why were they so allergic to this Republican Party concept of school choice?
Well, it turned out to be at least from the superintendents and the left side of the spectrum. I mean, not a single Democrat voted for it. Obviously, they kind of drew a line in the sand, and like this was what they were going all in for to be against. They were calling, emailing, showing up, and they spent a significant amount of time, probably didn't completely realize the full court press effort that they had against a number of the members of the legislature, particularly in the House, as early on as they started, and the continuous barrage that they had throughout the entire session. And I don't think they contacted senators near as much, because when we had a Senate version of the bill and passed through the Senate Education Committee, and my co-sponsor Blake Johnson was tremendous in getting down on the weeds and details and working through the bill and presenting or pulling it together after it failed in the House, putting it together along with the leadership of Senator Hendren, Hester, and Chairman English, as well as Senator Clark on the Education Committee. They put together a Senate version of the bill, and got it out of Senate Education Committee, and it passed the Senate with 22-5.
Wow.
I don't know that it was.
Were there any changes from the House bill that failed at first to what was drafted into the Senate? Were you comfortable with those changes?
There were some slight modifications. Really, to speak of, the substance of the bill was largely the same. A couple of the minor changes were tweaks, and with this sort of legislation, you're going to continuously have tweaks related.
I don't mean to interrupt.
A couple of the biggest.
I don't mean to interrupt. I don't mean to interrupt, but those tweaks, was that part of the negotiation? And I mean, it sounds like you tried to do everything you could to get this through.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we worked with the Department of Finance Administration, with the Education Department, with every single objection other than just the pure substance of the concept. We tried to work with even the administrators associations and public school representatives to try to work and address their concerns. And ultimately, in the end, you'd fix one thing, according to them, a fix, and then they'd have 5 more things that they were objectionable to. And so eventually it just came down to, this is what we've got, and this is the best turnkey type program that we're ever going to have to be able to present. We'll have to make, obviously, as you have something in place, then you make modifications and changes in the future based off of challenges that come up. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, going into it, this was the most comprehensive, complete piece of legislation that I've ever not only worked on but seen prior to it possibly going to effect.
And wasn't it a pretty easy? To me it's an easy concept, right? You had a savings account, right, that was going to be the parents' discretion. Could have funded private school, could have funded other educational costs, online classes, things like that. I mean, really just giving it's what it is more choice.
Yeah, I thought it was a fairly simple concept, and it was a way for us as a state to fulfill our obligation and responsibility to make sure our students are educated in the state, but also a way to have private buy-in and have private funding of these education savings accounts and help share that burden and that responsibility with the private sector through a tax credit scholarship, for lack of a better word. So basically somebody would be able to contribute their own money to a nonprofit organization. The nonprofit organization would be in charge of setting up these education savings accounts and scholarshiping the funds for parents and students to use. And those contributors to the nonprofit organization would be eligible for a 65 cent on the dollar tax credit for their contribution. So basically 1/3 of, or 2/3 of the funds that would go toward a student's education would come from a tax credit, and 1/3 would come strictly from private donations. That so we had a way that basically for every dollar somebody contributed, we got $1.54 worth of educational funding that went directly to a student's educational success, hopefully.
Yeah.
And
you know, and what private business doesn't want, wouldn't want to donate to something like that if you're looking to donate somewhere and get
well, yeah. I mean, you're going to owe the taxes either way. If you can contribute it and make sure that a kid's getting a good education and a customized education too, not just any type of education, but certain eligible expenses were clarified. These funds could only be used for things like tuition, books, private tutors. Say a kid needs help with math or English or something like that. They could hire a private tutor with these funds, and even pay for additional things outside of traditional K-12 type expenses. Funds for uniforms if the kid attended a private school where they needed uniforms, as well as rolling over money from one year to the next if they didn't use all of the funds in that account in that year for future educational expenses. Now, that was one of the big changes that happened between the House version that went down and the Senate version was the funds were able to be rolled over from year to year and applied toward college through age 22 in the House version of the bill. But the Senate version, that was removed, and you could only use the funds through high school. And the only thing that could pay for college-type expenses were concurring credit during high school. Otherwise, the account ended at the end of high school.
Again, we're talking with State Representative Jim Dotson. This is frustrating to me because we haven't spent a lot of time on this particular issue in the Republican Party platform that really just failed to get traction. So that's why I wanted to have you on and get your take on that and your impression on that. But were there any other areas that you were surprised with the majorities that the Republicans do have in the House and Senate? Any policies that they went for after that you thought maybe also conflicted with maybe where you thought people stand according to the Republican Party platform?
I'm sure that there's a number of things that were talked about, bandied back and forth, and most of the things you can probably take and have different interpretations of whether or not somebody agrees on the nuances of this policy or that policy. But as far as by and large, and maybe it was just my perspective and I was singular-mindedly focused on this one particular issue, this was the biggest, most glaring one in my mind that was sadly didn't go through. And it wasn't just by a little bit, it was by a significant margin. I ran a couple other things as well that I would have thought would have had more traction, particularly within a Republican majority, like the Compact for a Balanced Budget to our United States Constitution. That seems to be an issue that we're going to face as a nation and Arkansas decided not to do its part in trying to get a balanced budget to amendment to our Constitution.
So kind of as a follow-up, just real quick because we're running out of time, but last question. So what about more revenue? I mean, from my perspective, it seems like it was pretty clear there was a lot of pushes to try to get more revenue from the people. And I know there's a lot of arguments that go into that, fairness, or the tire tax for the environment. There's always a reason to do it, but there was this push to kind of increase the tax burden on the people of Arkansas. To me, that was another glaring, like, hey, whoa, are you guys Republicans or not?
Well, there's always going to be somebody that has a particular issue that they're going to push, and particularly when it comes to revenue, taxes, the debate back and forth on that is there's always a give and take and a difference of opinion all along the political spectrum, whether you're on the Republican side or even on the Democrat side. There's a lot of folks that fall on either side of filing bills and passing and that sort of thing. But the one takeaway that I would say, I know there's a lot of debate back and forth with regard to various tax or revenue type bills, and if you look at, even though there was a ton of things that were filed, which there always are, you look at what passed and what didn't pass, and the Republican majority did not pass tax increases. So I'd say that by and large, the Republican platform was largely adhered to with regards to overall the majority decided to stick with.
So when you say that, you're
traditional Republican platform.
You're talking about the defense.
There was a few that. I'm sorry.
You're talking about like there was good defense. So there was some stuff proposed, advocated for, but you're saying in general a lot of that stuff didn't pass. I'll take one exception. I mean, I feel like the tire tax was an increase that did pass. But you're saying for the most part they did fight off the gas tax increase and the internet sales tax. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and those were probably the two biggest ones that were pushed, and I think for various reasons. But if it's a straight tax increase without any sort of revenue offsets, that we're looking at, trying to just purely raise revenue and increase the tax burden on the people, that was, for the most part, shot down. At least from my perspective, I thought it was.
Yeah.
When you're looking at things that were more like tax reform, such as there was one. I think the single best piece of tax policy that we passed this session was a bill that actually eliminated the InvestArc tax credit over the next several years, and also eliminated the sales tax on manufacturing repair parts. And so it was basically a revenue tax swap. There, $40 million in tax credits were given away to the government, picking winners and losers with regards to that InvestArc tax policy. Mm-hmm. And now everyone has a tax break if you're in the manufacturing field. And so that business input is able to make all manufacturers in the state more competitive in the marketplace.
Yeah.
Regardless if you're small, medium, or you don't have to go to the government and say, hey, please give me this credit. You just don't pay the taxes on it, and we're more competitive as a state.
State Representative Jim Dotson, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for your impression of the session. We've got to go, but I'd love to do it again sometime, and just feel free to keep me posted about what's going on, what I need to know. So,
hey, thank you much. Have a good day.
All righty. Yes, sir. Folks, we got to take a break, and then we've got a hard break coming up next. Back in a minute.